Just going to talk a little bit about the devouring mother. We're going to use 5 case studies of devouring mothers in literature, and I hope we'll be able to kind of apply this concept to our own lives. And the devouring mother was kind of coined by Carl Jung to describe an overbearing mother, someone who consumes her children's potential psychologically and emotionally. And the reason is because this mother is not loving properly, meaning she's loving in more selfish ways, and it might not be readily apparent that these are selfish ways, but the love is not willing the good of the child. It's not looking long term at the child's potential and helping them achieve that potential, but rather the mother is stepping in the way of the potential by shielding the child, or even, as we'll talk about, neglecting the child. So there's many ways to do this, and we're going to talk about 5 of them. The 5 we're going to talk about are the neglectful mother, or kind of the overly selfish mother, the neurotic or overly emotional mother, the over-nurturer, overprotector, and the controlling mother. Now, Jung and Jordan Peterson focus in on the last 3, I would say, but I'm just kind of going to use the umbrella of the devouring mother to include these 2 others, because I do think they're rising in our society and they're important to look at because they can be destructive to children. So unfortunately, it's another weight problem we women have to deal with. And by that, I mean the weight of our presence is what is devouring. So too much weight of influence on the child, which stifles the potential. And so we, hopefully through these bad examples and being able to kind of judge them and not feel bad because they're not real people, we can really gain insight into our own issues. Maybe think about our own childhood, think about what we want to do with our own children and in our relationships. Queen Gertrude is our neglectful mother example. And Queen Gertrude is from Hamlet. And the story of Hamlet is her king husband dies, and I think it's like a week later, maybe it's a month later, she marries his brother. Now, we don't know if she was aware that the brother killed the king. Doesn't look like she knew, but either way, she just ran off and got married, and didn't seem to think about Hamlet and what he would think about this, because Hamlet, he loved his father and really looked up to him, and we see in the scene that I'm going to show that he is just really angry that his mother would go off and marry this guy so quickly and not seem to consider his feelings or what he would think about it, and just he saw her as a very selfish person. And he makes that very clear, that she did not have her eyes open to the impact this would have on other people. And so this is the neglectful and selfish mother that we see everywhere around us. And it was not hard to find examples in literature of selfish mothers, because it's not just mothers, it's all of us are selfish, right? So Madame Bovary is a good example, Rebecca from Vanity Fair, and also Anna Karenina. So a selfish mother is especially destructive because we are meant to put our children first. Now, that doesn't mean we don't make time for ourselves, or we have constant self-sacrifice, because that's not always good for kids. It means we think of them and their good before our own. That's the deal we make when we decide to be mothers. And so Hamlet is angry that his mother has not kept up that bargain that you make when you're a mother. And what you'll see in today's world is just this I think the helicopter mom is on her way out, and the cell phone mom is coming up. And Jordan Peterson, I have to disagree with him a little bit, because he really neglects the neglectful mom. He talks about useful neglect and that it can be good, which is true. You don't want to be up in your kid's business all the time. But there are a lot of children who suffer because they are in homes where they are not cared for properly. They're neglected. See that, unfortunately, a lot. So we need to pay attention to this. So the cell phone mom is the mom who is so distracted by her phone or by all the distractions we have now that they're not focused on their children. They're not connecting with their child. You even see this with nursing babies. If you're just looking on your phone and not looking at your child's face as you nurse, then that actually does, they've shown that that has impact on the child's emotional development. So we need to connect with our children. And Gertrude was not connected. And she and Hamlet had an interesting relationship. You can see that that there was obviously a closeness that he feels has been severed. Freud got a lot of his Oedipal complex ideas from Hamlet, and it's because they had kind of a strange relationship. If you watch the whole clip, you see obviously there was too much, and then it was like the relationship was probably too much, and then it was severed too quickly by Gertrude, and he's just shocked that it's almost like this has all been a lie in his eyes. Okay, and so there wasn't the proper balance. And so in the clip, I want you to just notice the surprise from Queen Gertrude, because this is common with neglectful mothers. They're not connected, so they're not aware of what they're doing to their children. They don't know the harm they're causing. So she's just shocked that he's so angry, and he's angry because he knows that part of the deal of being a mom is you're supposed to think of your kids before yourself, and she hasn't done that. So I'm going to go ahead and play this.
Have my father much offended?
Oh, come. You answer with an idle tongue.
Go. You question with a wicked tongue.
Why, how now, Hamlet?
What's the matter now?
Have you forgot me?
No, brother Rude, not so. You are the queen, your husband's brother's wife, and would it were not so, you are my mother.
Nay, then, I'll set those to you that can speak.
Please, sit you down, and let me wring your heart, for so I shall, if it be made of penetrable stuff.
What have I done, that thou darest wag thy tongue in noise so rude against me?
Such an act that blurs the grace and blush of modesty, calls virtue hypocrite, makes marriage vows as false as dicers' oaths.
I mean, what act?
Look here upon this picture and on this. The counterfeit presentment of two brothers. See what a grace was seated on this brow. A combination and a form indeed, where every god did seem to set his seal, to give the world assurance of a man. This was your husband. Look you now what follows. Here is your husband, like a mildewed ear blasting his wholesome brother. Have you eyes? Could you on this fair mountain leave to feed and batten on this moor? Have you eyes? You cannot call it love, for at your age the heyday and the blood is tame, it's humble, and waits upon the judgment. And what judgment would step from this to this? Eyes without feeling, feeling without sight. Oh, shame, where is thy blush?
Speak no more. Thou turnst my eyes into my very soul, and there I see such black and grained spots as will not leave their chamber.
That was pretty intense, huh? I want to encourage you to watch Hamlet or read it if you haven't, because it is a play that was written for our day, and Hamlet's kind of hopelessness and nihilism is something we're seeing arise in. And so we'll move on to our next devouring mother. We're going to turn to Miss Havisham from Great Expectations by Charles Dickens, and she is probably the worst mother in all literature. I think most people would agree with that. She was jilted at the altar, and she just got stuck in a state of perpetual mourning from that moment on. Even clean up the house, like it was rat infested, and she still had her wedding dress on, and so she could not overcome her grief. And so this is kind of tied to the neglectful mother in that it's selfish, meaning she adopts a child, and at that point she's hoping that maybe she can actually be a help to the child. But instead of shifting her focus from her own tragedy, she continues in the rumination, and just becomes a weak woman who cannot get over it and doesn't seek to get over it. And I mean, I just want to make clear that we all have bad days, and some of us have mental health issues. And so that doesn't mean you can't be a good mother. But what we see from Miss Havisham is a complete lack of introspection of what she has done to her daughter. And her daughter becomes a cold, very lacks empathy, and her daughter Estella sees that in herself and blames her mother because of her mother's weakness, and her mother got consumed with envy and vindictiveness. And so it just became a dark home. It became a home where the mother was the center of the world because of her own grief. And you see with children who are raised by mothers who are highly neurotic or overly emotional, and that that don't have resilience, that the children feel like they are unsafe. They don't feel safe in their home because it's a kind of unpredictable, chaotic environment, and they lack respect for their mother. And you see that in the clip that I'll show of Great Expectations, that Estella, she just turns on her mom because she does blame her. And as children, we have this innate, we feel like we are supposed to be cared for by our mother. And so when that is not there, there is a lot of anger, and just, it's hard to feel safe in the world. And so I think when we have struggles, the most important thing is for our children to see that we're trying to overcome them, and not just be bogged down by them. We need to be an example of stoicism in the face of adversity, and learning resilience for our children. Our children are not there to be our therapists. We can't put our emotional turmoil on our children because they're not capable of handling that. So we have to seek out other sources to cope, because it can be very emotionally damaging for children. And so in this devouring mother, we see the weight of her emotion is the thing that devours Estella, and keeps her from reaching her potential. And so I'll play that clip. And so just watch out for the impact this has on this woman. Should be a woman in the clip. And just watch Miss Havisham and see here some, some of our own attitudes sometimes of just hopelessness, and what that does to the people around her. So I'll play that.
Do you think beauty is a destroyer of men, Pip? I can't sure is.
He asked Miss Havisham to settle money on him. A great deal of money.
What do you think it is? It looks like your wedding cake, miss.
On the day of the wedding, he sent her a note.
It is the ghost of a wedding cake.
He's never seen again.
And I am the ghost of a bride. Time stands still. Yet everything turns to dust. I cannot do this today. I cannot. Not today. How can it be so cold?
It's what you trained me to be. Leave me alone.
No! I will not let you leave me! You will not leave me! The broken heart. You think you will die, but you just keep living day after day after day.
Okay, so the next one is over nurture, and the next three actually are more in line with what Carl Jung and Jordan Peterson speak about when they talk devouring, because they're the kind of overbearing group, we'll call it. So I think that the things that really tie these three together, and actually the previous two as well, is just a lack of hope and faith that the world is a good place, or that your children are capable. So kind of just a lack of hope is what you should look for when we look at these devouring mothers, some of which are not women. But okay, so it's just an over influence of mothers. See, a lot of times we think that more is better. Like when we talk about neglect, we think, well, the opposite of neglect is I need to be in there with my kids all the time, but that's not always the case, and a lot of times it's not the case. Sometimes when I am considering how to help a child, the answer comes that I shouldn't do anything, that I should just step back. So we tend to think that we have all the answers, but oftentimes the answer is to let the child figure it out on their own. So the clip I'm going to show next is of Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, Veruca Salt, as the over-nurtured child. Now, it was actually kind of hard to find an example of an over-nurtured child in classic literature because they just didn't have the time, resources, or money or energy to really spoil their children or over-nurture them. This is a modern thing. Now you hear stories about certain kings or queens that didn't turn out, and it was probably because they were over-nurtured, but this was a rarity. And so now, and I think it kind of goes in line with the cell phone mom, when you're neglecting your child, you're just throwing stuff at them to keep them quiet is really what happens. You compensate by giving them things, but the over-nurturer in particular focuses on shielding children from their own emotions. And so you'll see with Veruca Salt, their parents are just dreadfully afraid of her because she gets so angry. And so they're trying to avoid her emotions. And so instead of teaching their children, Veruca, to cope with the emotions, they just keep trying to give her things to solve it. And I see this with myself. I have a son who is pretty sensitive and can kind of be mopey, and it's really difficult for women to have unhappy children, for mothers to have unhappy children, because we just want our kids to be happy. And so I find myself really trying to make it right, and sometimes maybe that is the path, but most of the time I think we just have to teach our kids coping mechanisms and then kind of step back, because when we keep stepping in, we're actually inhibiting the child from learning how to overcome their emotions. And so with Veruca Salt and with spoiled kids is what happens. They become spoiled. They become children you don't want to be around. Okay, and Jordan Peterson talks about don't let your children do anything that makes you dislike them. If you see a child that you dislike, it's probably because they were over-nurtured. Okay, so they were allowed to develop habits because their parents were avoiding conflict. Okay, and so with Veruca, she just becomes this nightmare, but it's her, Willy Wonka says it's her parents' fault. And I think that's true. Obviously kids have different dispositions, so you shouldn't go around blaming parents for everything. But I'm just saying that what happens with the over-nurtured child is they become a perpetual mama's boy. They lack confidence because they haven't learned to overcome their own emotional states. They often have anxiety. They are unappreciative because they've always been given things and not had to earn them. Easily offended. These are things we're really seeing a rise in our society, with kids just not being able to cope because their mom or their dad has always just stepped in and made things right for them. So in this clip, I think you'll see the fear that the parents have of their child. And if you see yourself walking down that path with your child, something has gone wrong. Okay, so I'll play that.
They're not even trying. They don't want to find it. They're jealous of me.
Sweetheart, I can't push them no harder. 19,000 bars an hour they're shelling. 760,000 they've done so far.
You promised, Daddy. You promised I'd have it the very first day.
You're going to be very unpopular around here, Henry, if you don't deliver soon.
It breaks my heart, Henrietta. I hate to see her unhappy.
I won't talk to you ever again. You're a rotten, mean father. You never give me anything I want. And I won't go to school till I have it.
Veruca, sweetheart, angel. Now, there are only 4 tickets left in the whole world, and the whole ruddy world's hunting for them. What can I do?
Okay, so now we're going to turn to the overprotector. And this differs from over-nurturing because nurturing focuses on emotion and ensuring that our children don't have negative emotion or protecting them from that. And overprotection is more about outside threats. And so you'll see with Lord Elrond, obviously not a woman, well, not totally obvious, but not a woman, that he is focused on her safety and not having to go through suffering. And so they shield through fear, trying to a lot of control through fear. And we see that a lot in our modern day, what's happening. And so Lord Elrond, I'm not going to go into the story too much because I assume many of you already know it, but Arwen has really felt strongly that she's supposed to marry Strider. And who wouldn't? But so Aragon or Strider is really what she feels is her destiny, and he just lays it on thick about how much suffering this is going to bring to her. And I know I've done that in my children's lives sometimes. Like my son just decided to start playing football, and I definitely listed all the things that could happen. And I think that, you do need to make sure your children are aware of threats, but also I think you don't want to block them on their paths because they each have their own path, and it's a path that's not, we walk side by side with them for some of it, but we don't want to block them from their eventual potential by stepping in the way. And so for my son, I feel like, talking with him and just knowing him, I mean, he was born just an athlete and is obsessed with sports. I just felt like I was blocking his path. And so I needed to step back and let him and his father kind of make the decision. And I feel good about that. But it is one of those things that as mothers, we can justify our overprotection because we are called upon to keep our children safe. But when they're young, we really need to kind of focus on that, and then we need to taper it off, and we need to encourage them to be independent and to not rely on us, and not to put fear into their hearts. But children who are overprotected tend to lack confidence, and they can kind of have a shallowness about them because they haven't experienced the real world. And anxiety is definitely a byproduct of not being put out into the world and having to face the threats that are there. So as you look at this clip, I just want you to notice the guilt that Lord Elrond kind of uses. And I think earlier in the movie, he says, he guilt trips her like, what about me? Don't you love me? Don't I matter? And also just that he is trying to kind of keep Arwen from what she feels is best. And our children are entitled to their own revelation about their life. And so we need to really be clued in to when we're putting our own will into it and when we need to open ourselves to what maybe is the path God has for them and their particular passions and interests. And it can be scary, but and I think you'll see that with Lord Elrond that you do have sympathy for his position on this. So we'll play that.
But you, my daughter, you will linger on in darkness and in doubt, as nightfall in winter that comes without a star. Here you will dwell, bound to your grief under the fading trees, until all the world is changed and the long years of your life are utterly spent.
Tell me what you have seen.
Arwen,
You have the gift of foresight. What did you see?
I looked into your future and I saw death.
There is also life. You saw there was a child. You saw my son.
That future is almost gone.
But it is not lost.
Nothing is certain.
Some things are certain. If I leave him now, I will regret it forever. It is time.
Okay, next we're going to move to Mother Gothel from Rapunzel. I'm going to kind of focus on the fairy tale of this rather than the Disney version. So the controlling mother, in this case, it's the witch mother. And her focus is on shielding her child from her own will, or protecting her child from her will. I don't even know in this case if she really cares about protecting her child. She just wants to control. And so oftentimes you see this with mothers. I am guilty of this tendency. So I'm grateful for examples like this to clue me into it, because we do think oftentimes that mother knows best. And I often think that if everyone just did what I said, then the world would be a better place. But that's not any way to live a life, and it's not the right perspective. And so with Mother Gothel, we see that she seeks control of her child. It's not even her child. She's basically stole it from the poor farmer who was just trying to get his wife something she was craving in her pregnancy. So anyway, back then they believed that if a pregnant woman doesn't get what she's craving, that she'll die. And so this was kind of a trade, mother for daughter. And at 12, once Rapunzel starts getting her own will, she locks her in the tower because the witch does not want any of that. So oftentimes what we see that happens, and what happens in the story, is that the children rebel against this. Now, Rapunzel was very naive, and she let this prince into the tower, and they got married because he came every night for several weeks and impregnated her. And so the witch discovered this and threw her, put her into the wilderness. And eventually the prince, even though he's blinded by the thorns in the tower, he finds her, and it all ends happily. But it's just interesting to see the reaction of Rapunzel in the clip I'm going to show. She just realizes, there's a moment where you can see in her face that she realizes, wait, this woman never actually cared about me. She just wants to control me. And so this is, it's much more about the weight of our will on our child and not trusting the child. So Lady Macbeth is another example, but let's go ahead and look at this clip and just look for really a lack of empathy on the mother's part, and she's just not that concerned with what the child wants.
When I've done absolutely nothing wrong.
Okay, I've been thinking a lot about what you said earlier.
I hope you're not still talking about the stars.
Floating lights, and yes, I'm leading up to that.
Because I really thought we dropped the issue, sweetheart.
No, Mother, I'm just saying, you think I'm not strong enough to handle myself out there.
Oh, darling, I know you're not strong enough to handle yourself out there.
But if you just...
Rapunzel, we're done talking about this.
Trust me.
Rapunzel.
I know what
Rapunzel.
Oh, come on.
Enough of the lights, Rapunzel. You are not leaving this tower. Ever. Oh, great. Now I'm the bad guy.
Just another thing I want to point out real quick is the tower itself is an archetype that you see throughout literature. The two towers in the Lord of the Rings, also just the phrase sitting in their ivory towers, it's a disconnected from reality, looking above but not being in the fray. And when we put our kids in towers, when we shield them, then they are not living in reality, and it can create this kind of separation from a superiority or a naivety. And so just look out for towers as you're reading literature, because it is a theme that repeats itself, and it's usually and negative space is a tower.
This says the mother. Well, what's the sacrifice of the mother? Well, that's easy. If you're a mother, and if you're a mother who's worth her salt, you offer your son to be destroyed by the world. That's what you do. I mean, that's what's going to happen, right? He's going to be born, he's going to suffer, he's going to have his trouble in life, he's going to have his illnesses, he's going to face his failures and catastrophes, and he's going to die. That's what's going to happen. And if you're awake, you know that, and then you say, well, perhaps he will live in a way that will justify that. And then you try to have that happen. And that's what makes you worthy of a statue like that.
Okay, we've come to the end. Want to close with Jordan Peterson. My kids are home from school, so it's a good time to end. I just want to close up by speaking a little about the good mother, which is what we all want to be, even if we're men and not mothers. It just means being properly oriented to those around us and to the world, and I think it's all about faith and hope. And that's what devouring mothers are missing, and that's what the good mother has. Hope that this child that she's raising can be the salvation of the world, and that our children can bring salvation to the world. And you can't hold on tight to your own will or to safety. You have to open your arms to basically to the spirit about what's right to do. Because when we talk about the golden mean and trying to find the balance between excesses, we have to be in tune with what we're supposed to do as a mother in each situation. And so there's not a formula that we have. We just have to be in tune with the good of the child always has to come first. So the good mother puts the good of the child above her own and above her own will. And the wonderful thing is when we can do this, when we can lock in, then motherhood becomes so much more wonderful. When we can lock into this, even if you're not a mother, you can just have more hope and get more joy out of life because you're not holding on too tightly to things. So I want to close there, and I want to thank you.